July 4th, 1899, Volume 2, Jesus Speaks About Disturbance. This morning Jesus renewed in me the pains of the crucifixion. Our Queen Mamma was also present, and Jesus, speaking of her, said, "My kingdom was in the heart of my mother, and this because her heart was never disturbed even slightly, so much so that in the immense sea of the Passion she suffered immense pains, and her heart was pierced through by the sword of sorrow, but she did not receive the slightest breath of disturbance. Therefore, since my kingdom is a kingdom of peace, I was able to lay my kingdom within her, and to reign freely without any obstacle." Jesus kept coming other times, and I, seeing myself all full of sins, said to him, "My Lord Jesus, I feel I am all covered with wounds and with grave sins. Oh, please, I beg you, have pity on this miserable one." And Jesus, "Do not fear, for there are no grave sins. And besides, one must have horror for sin, but not become disturbed, because agitation, wherever it comes from, never does good to the soul." Then he added, "My daughter, you are victim, as I am. Let all your work shine with the same intentions as mine, pure and holy, so that finding my own image in you, I may pour the influence of my graces freely, and I may offer you, adorned in this way, as fragrant victim before divine justice." July 4th, 1907, Volume 8. The soul must ruminate within her mind on the truths she has learned. I was thinking, how bad I have become, yet the Lord does not correct me. He does not scold me. While I was thinking of this, I felt him move in my interior, telling me, "My daughter, keep walking, keep walking. If I am goodness, mercy, sweetness, I am also justice, strength, power. If I saw you go backward, or commit voluntary defects, after the so many graces I have given you, you would deserve to be struck by lightning, and indeed I would strike you. If I do not do it, you yourself can understand why. And if I do not always speak to you, ruminate constantly in your mind on all the truths I have taught you, then enter into your interior, unite yourself with me, and I will always be with you, operating interiorly." July 4th, 1910, Volume 9. The agony in the garden was, in a special way, for the help of the dying. The agony on the cross was for help at the last moment, at the very last breath. Continuing in my usual state, full of privations and of bitterness, I was thinking about the agony of our Lord, and the Lord told me, "My daughter, in a special way I wanted to suffer the agony in the garden, in order to help all of the dying to die well. Look well at how my agony is combined with the agony of Christians, tediums, sadnesses, anguishes, the sweat of blood. I felt the death of all and of each one, as if I were really dying for each one in particular. So I felt the tediums, the sadnesses, the anguishes of each one within me, and with my own I offered help, comfort, and hope to all, so that as I felt their deaths in me, they might all receive the grace to die all in me, as though in one single breath, with my breath, and to be beatified immediately by my divinity." If the agony in the garden was in a special way for the dying, The agony on the cross was for help at the last moment, at the very last breath. They are both agonies, but one is different from the other. The agony in the garden, full of sadnesses, of fears, of anxieties, of frights. The agony on the cross, full of peace, of imperturbable calm. And if I cried out, "I thirst," it was the insatiable thirst that all might breathe their last in my last breath. And in seeing that many would go out of my last breath, out of grief, I cried out, "Sitio," meaning I thirst. And this Sitio still continues to cry out to all and to each one like a bell at the door of each heart. I thirst for you, O soul. Oh, please never go out of me, but enter into me and breathe your last in me. So 6 are the hours of my passion, which I gave to men in order to die well. The 3 in the garden were for help in the agony, the 3 on the cross for help at the very last sigh before death. After this, who could not look at death with a smile? More so for one who loves me, for one who tries to sacrifice himself on my very cross. Do you see how beautiful death is, and how things are changed? In life I was despised. The very miracles did not produce the effects of my death. Even up to the cross there were insults. But as soon as I breathed my last, death had the power to change things. All beat their breasts, confessing me the true Son of God. My very disciples plucked up courage, and even those who were hidden became brave and asked for my body, giving me honorable burial. Heaven and earth in full voice confessed me the Son of God. Death is something great, something sublime. And this happens also for my own children. In life they are despised, oppressed. Those very virtues which, like light, should make those who are around them start, remain half-veiled. Their heroisms and suffering, their abnegations, their zeal for souls cast lights and doubts in those who surround them. And I myself permit these veils, so as to preserve with more safety the virtue of my dear children. But as soon as they die, I withdraw these veils, since they are no longer necessary, and the doubts become certainties. The light becomes clear, and this light makes others appreciate their heroism. They pay esteem to everything, even to the smallest things. Therefore, what cannot be done in life is made up for by death. This as for what happens down here. That which happens up there, then, is truly surprising and enviable to all mortals. July 4th, 1912, Volume 11. In the divine will, the soul must die to everything, like in a tomb, closed by love, in order to rise again to a divine life. By thinking about herself, the soul escapes from the divine life. This morning, after communion, I was saying to my always adorable Jesus, to what a state I reduced myself. It seems that everything runs away from me, sufferings, virtues, everything. And Jesus, my daughter, what is this? Do you want to waste time? Do you want to get out of your nothingness? Stay in your place, in your nothingness, so that the all may keep its place in you. But know that you must die completely in my will, to the suffering, to the virtues, to everything. My will must be the tomb of the soul. Just as nature is consumed in the tomb to the extent of disappearing completely, and by that consummation it will rise again to a new and more beautiful life, in the same way the soul buried in my will as if inside a tomb will die to the suffering, to her virtues, to her spiritual goods, and will rise again in everything to divine life. Ah, my daughter, it seems that you want to imitate the mundane, who tend to what is temporal and ends, while they don't consider what is eternal. My beloved, why do you not want to learn to live only in my volition? Why do you not want to live the life of heaven while still being on earth? My will is love, the one that never dies. Therefore my will must be your sepulchre, and love is the lid which has to lock you and seal you in, giving you no more hope of getting out. Then every thought that regards oneself, even about virtues, is always gain for oneself, and runs away from the divine life. While if the soul thinks only about me and what regards me, she takes the divine life in herself, and taking the divine life, she escapes the human life, taking all possible goods. Have we understood each other? July 4th, 1917, Volume 12. All the pains of the creatures were suffered before by Jesus. One who lives the divine will is together with Jesus in the tabernacle. Continuing in my usual state, I was feeling a little in suffering, and my adorable Jesus came and placed himself in front of me. It seemed that between me and Jesus there were many electric wires of communication, and he told me, "My daughter, each pain which the soul suffers is one additional communication that the soul acquires. In fact, all the pains that the creature could suffer were suffered before by me, in my humanity, and took their place in the divine order. And since the creature cannot suffer them altogether, my goodness communicates them little by little, and in doing so, the chains of union with me keep growing. This not only for the pains, but for all the good that the creature can do. In this way, the links of connection between me and her develop." Another day I was thinking to myself about the good that other souls receive by being in front of the most blessed sacrament, while I, poor one, was deprived of it. And blessed Jesus told me, "My daughter, one who does my will is with me in the tabernacle, and shares in my pains, in the coldness, in the irreverences, and in all that the very souls who are in my sacramental presence do. One who does my will must excel in everything, and the place of honor is always reserved for her. Therefore, who receives more good, one who is before me, or one who is with me? I do not tolerate even one step of distance, nor division of pains or of joys between me and one who does my will. I may keep her on the cross, but always with me. This is why I want you always in my will, to give you the first place inside my sacramental heart. I want to feel your heart palpitating in mine, with my own love and pain. I want to feel your will in mine, which multiplying in everyone may give me the reparations of all, and the love of all in one single act. And I want to feel my will in yours, which making your poor humanity my own, may raise it before the majesty of the Father as my continuous victim." July 4th, 1927, Volume 22, Offering of Communion. How our wills are the accidents in which Jesus is multiplied. how the soul who lives in the divine will contains the source of all the sacraments. I was doing my thanksgiving, for I had received Holy Communion, and I was thinking to myself that I wanted to offer it to all and to each inhabitant of heaven, to each soul in purgatory, to all the living who are and will be, and not only to them, but I would like to give my sacramental Jesus to the starry heavens, to the flowery fields, in sum to each created thing, in order to give him the glory and the triumph of all his works. But while I was saying this, I thought to myself, this is my usual nonsense. How can I form so many Jesuses? This is impossible. And my beloved Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, just as in the sacramental host there are the little accidents of the bread, and your Jesus hides inside of them, alive and real, and as many Jesuses for as many as are the hosts. In the same way, in the soul there are the accidents of the human will, not subject to being consumed like the accidents of my sacramental life, and therefore more fortunate and more solid. And just as the Eucharistic life multiplies in the hosts, so does my divine will multiply my life in each act of the human will that more than accident lends itself to the multiplication of my life. As you were making your will flow within mine, and wanted to give me to each one, so was my will forming my life in yours, and from its light it released my life, giving me to each one. And I, oh, how happy I felt that the little daughter of my will was forming so many of my lives in the accidents of her will, to give me not only to animate creatures, but to all things created by me. So as I was multiplying my life, I felt I was constituting myself the king of all, king of the sun, of the sea, king of the flowers, of the stars, of the heavens, in sum, of everything. My daughter, one who lives in my will, possesses within herself the fount of the source of the sacraments, and can multiply me as much as she wants, and in whatever way she wants. Afterwards I remained doubtful about the last sentence written here above, and my beloved Jesus added, my daughter, the sacraments came out of my will like many little fountains. I issued them from it, keeping in it the source from which each of these fountains continuously receives the goods and the fruits that each of them contains. But they act according to the dispositions of those who receive them. So because of lack of dispositions on the part of creatures, the fountains of the sacraments do not produce the great goods they contain. Many times they pour waters, but the creatures are not washed. Other times they consecrate, impressing a divine and indelible character, but in spite of this they do not appear to be sanctified. Another fountain gives birth to the life of your Jesus continuously. They receive this life, but neither the effects of it nor the life of your Jesus can be seen in them. So each sacrament has its sorrow, because they do not see their fruits and the goods they contain in all creatures. Now for one who lives in my will, letting it reign as in its own kingdom, since my divine will possesses the source of the sacraments, what is the wonder if one who lives in it possesses the source of all the sacraments, and feels within herself the nature of these sacraments, with all the effects and goods they contain? And as she receives them from the Church, she will feel that it is food that she possesses, but that she takes in order to give complete glory to those sacraments, whose source she possesses, and to glorify that very divine will that instituted them, because in it alone there will be perfect glory for all our works. This is why I so much long for the kingdom of the supreme Fiat, because it alone will give balance to everything. It will give to creatures all the goods it wants, and will receive the glory that they owe it. July 4th, 1928, Volume 24. Necessity of advances in order to purchase the kingdom of the divine will. How the divine will renders everything light as a feather, and therefore one can embrace everything. Continuing my round in the divine Fiat, I was thinking to myself, what is the utility of these continuous repetitions of asking over and over again for the kingdom of the divine will, and the repetition of going around in it in order to commit it to grant its kingdom, that it may come to dominate in the midst of creatures? At that moment my beloved Jesus moved in my interior and told me, "My daughter, when one wants to make a purchase, one pays advances, and the more advances are given, the more the purchase is secured, and the less remains to be paid when one comes to the final acts of the definitive purchase. Now, since you want the kingdom of my will, it is necessary for you to give advances, and every time you go around in it, asking for its kingdom over and over again, and emitting your acts on behalf of all for the same purpose, you add as many more advances to secure your purchase of the kingdom of my divine Fiat. And since it is the purchase of it that you want to make, it is necessary that your acts be done in it, that they acquire the value of the currency coined by my divine will. Otherwise it would not be a valid currency, and what could circulate for the purchase of it? It would be a currency from outside the kingdom. In fact, one who wants to purchase divine will must give acts of advance done in it, and my will benignly deigns to coin them with the value of its fiat, in such a way that the soul can give the necessary advances for the purchase of it. This is the utility of your little rounds in my Fiat. The acts that you emit in it, your asking over and over again for the coming of its kingdom, are all necessary things that are needed for the great purchase of it. Did I not do the same for redemption? I had to pay the advance of my acts before my celestial Father, and I had to pay for all in order to obtain the kingdom of redemption. And when I made the whole payment, then was it signed by the divinity that the kingdom was mine. Therefore continue placing your advances if you want to have it signed that the kingdom of my Fiat is yours. After this I was saying to my Jesus, in your will I take the whole creation in my arms, the heavens, the sun, the stars, and everything, to bring them before the Supreme Majesty as the most beautiful adoration and prayer, to ask it for the kingdom of the Fiat. But while I was doing this, I thought to myself, how can I embrace everything if my littleness is such that I could embrace not even one star? What about everything? So these things are not feasible. And my lovable Jesus moving in my interior told me, my daughter, one who possesses my divine will can take everything. My will has the virtue of rendering anything light. It renders heavens, stars, suns, the whole creation, angels, saints, the Virgin Queen, and God himself, light as a feather. In fact, since my divine will flows as primary life in everything, one is the life, one is the weight. So whatever the weight of all things together, such is the weight of each one of them. Therefore, only one who possesses my Fiat can take everything and give me everything, because having the virtue of extending heavens, of forming stars, and so forth, wherever it is present, it has the virtue of taking everything and of embracing everything. This, indeed, is the great prodigy of the living in my will. Littleness can carry and embrace immensity. Weakness can carry strength. The nothing can possess the all. The creature, the creator. Wherever there is the life of my divine will, there are all prodigies united together. The infinite, the eternal, lets himself be carried as though in triumph in the little arms of she who lives in it, because in her they look, not at her, but at the divine will that has the right over everything, can do anything, and embraces everything. And so she can give everything to her Creator as her own. In fact, was it perhaps not my Fiat that extended the heavens and populated them with stars? If it had the virtue of making them, it also has the virtue of embracing them, and of letting them be carried in triumph, like a light feather, by the creature who lives in its divine will. Therefore continue your flight in it, and you will do everything, to give me everything, and to ask me for everything. July 4th, 1930, Volume 28. All created things possess the repetitive virtue of the divine Fiat. I felt I was being crushed under the weight of tremendous oppressions that surround my poor existence. Oh, how I longed for the celestial fatherland! I would have wanted to disappear from the earth without ever again hearing and seeing anyone. I long to fling myself into the arms of Jesus, to say to him, "My love, keep me clasped in your arms. Do not leave me any more, because only in your arms I feel secure. I fear nothing. Jesus, have pity on me. You know what passes in my soul. Do not abandon me." And I tried as much as I could to abandon myself in the supreme Fiat. And my sweet Jesus, having compassion for me, making himself seen, all tenderness, told me, "Poor daughter of mine, courage. Know that you are not alone in suffering, but you have your Jesus who suffers together with you, or rather, more than you do, because these are things that regard me more than you, and I feel them so vividly that I feel my pierced heart being tortured. However, what must console us is that they are things from the external forum. Between me and you nothing has changed. As things were, so are they now. Human judgments have no power in our intimacies and communications. Therefore they can do no harm to us. Therefore I do not want your flight in my divine will to be ever interrupted. My will has the repetitive virtue, and all things created by us that have their continuous dwelling in our volition possess the virtue of repeating the continuous act received from God in creation, and of giving to creatures, each day, their continuous act. The sun each day gives its light. The air lets itself be breathed continuously. The water repeats each day its giving itself to man in order to quench his thirst, wash him, and refresh him. And so do all other created things. They repeat the repetitive virtue of my divine Fiat. And if any of these created things could go out from within it, they would instantly lose the virtue of repeating their continuous act, that while it is old, is always new for the good of creatures. This is the surest sign that created things are in my divine will, and this is the sign that the soul lives in it and lets herself be dominated. If her acts, though old, have the virtue of being as though always new and continuous. In my divine will there are no stops. the soul feels the ease and virtue of her continuous act. Does the sun perhaps stop in its course of always giving light? Certainly not. Such is the soul who lives in my divine will. She feels within herself all the fullness, and as though converted into her own nature, the vivifying virtue of the divine goods and of the continuous act of the divine Fiat. Now, just as created things repeat their continuous act, so do my acts and those of my celestial mamma, because they are done in the divine will and are animated by it, possess the repetitive virtue, and more than sun, dart through creatures and rain down upon their heads all the goods of all our acts, that though old, are always new for the good of miserable humanity, because they possess the continuous act. But even though they rain down upon their heads without ever ceasing, they are not taken by the creatures, and only then do they receive the fruit of our continuous acts, when they recognize them, implore them, and want to receive them. Otherwise they receive nothing. It happens as to the sun. If the creature does not go out to enjoy and receive the good of its continuous light, she does not receive all the goods of its light. She receives it only those times in which she takes the care of going out. And if another one does not open the doors, even though the sun invests the earth with its continuous active light, she will remain in the dark. And therefore, my daughter, if you want to take all the good of your Jesus and of the Sovereign of Heaven, in our Fiat you will find them all in act. Implore them upon yourself, recognize them, and you will feel yourself under the reign of our continuous acts. July 4th, 1936, Volume 34. How one act of human will can ruin the divine order and its most beautiful works. The first thing that God wants is absolute freedom. How the divine will form many Jesuses where it reigns. My poor mind does not know how to be without going around and flying in the divine volition, and my poor human will feels itself as under the press of the divine will, and I thought to myself, ah, yes, it is beautiful. One feels the victory, the triumph, the dominion, the happiness, the beautiful conquests of living in the divine volition. But the human volition, while it feels itself alive, it must continually die. It is true that it is the greatest honor, the greatest love of God, to deign to descend into the will of the creature, and with his majesty and power to operate, to do what he wants. And the human one, remaining at its place, can only do what God does, while it must give up everything of its own. This is the sacrifice of sacrifices, especially in certain circumstances. Oh, how sorrowful it is to feel life and hold it as if one did not have it, because the divine Fiat does not tolerate that even one fiber of human volition would act in its. And a crowd of thoughts occupied my poor mind. And my sweet Jesus, compassionating my ignorance and the sorrowful state in which I found myself, with indescribable tenderness, placing his most holy hand on my head, he told me, "Blessed daughter, courage, do not lose heart. My divine volition wants everything because it knows that one little act, one desire, one fiber of human volition would spoil its most beautiful works. The divine order, its sanctity, would remain hindered, its love restricted, its power limited. This is the reason why it does not tolerate that even one thread of human volition have its life. It is true that it is the sacrifice of sacrifices. No other sacrifice can equal the weight, the value, the intensity of the sacrifice of living without will, so much so that perennial life, this continuous miracle of my divine volition, is needed in order to be able to endure this sacrifice, before which the others can be called shadows, painted pictures, games of children who cry over nothing, because there is the human volition that in the sufferings, in the sorrowful encounters, in the works, does not feel itself undone, without life, without satisfactions. Therefore the sacrifices are felt. Oh, how much lighter, but emptied of God, of sanctity, of love, of light, of true happiness, and perhaps not even beings emptied of sins, because the human will without mind can never do good and holy things. Then, if my fiat would not have the virtue of having the human volition with itself without giving it life, rather enclosing its life in it in order to do something, it would not find either the place or the time to be able to act. It would not be able to operate with that divine display, luxury, and splendor that we usually do in our works. If there had been another will in creation, it would have impeded the divine sumptuousness, display, and splendor that we have in the whole creation. It would have impeded the extension of the sky, the multiplicity of the stars, the vastness of the light of the sun, the variety of so many created things. It would have placed a limit on us. Therefore our volition wants to be alone in order to do what it knows how to do, and it wants to do. This is why it wants the human will with itself, concurrent, spectator, admirer of what it wants to do in her. But she must be convinced, if she wants to live in my will, that hers cannot act any more, and that it must serve in order to enclose mine in hers, so as to let it do its works with all liberty, with all sumptuousness, with the luxury of grace, and with the splendor of its divine varieties. The first thing that we want is absolute liberty. We want to be free, my daughter, be it whatever the sacrifice that we want, and the works that we want to do. If this could not be, the living in my will be a way of saying, but in reality will not exist. Dear Jesus became silent, and I thought about everything that Jesus had told me, and I said to myself, He has reason that the human volition cannot act before the sanctity and power of His. Already as by itself it places her at her place of nothingness. There is needed so much in order to act before a divine will. Already she feels incapable, and she herself would pray that she would not have the great misfortune of letting one motion, one fiber be formed of her own volition. But my cross, and you know it, in what a labyrinth you have placed me. I feel hindered and humiliated even to dust. I have need, and you know of whom, without being able to help myself, and not for 1 day, 1 year. Oh, how hard it is. I know that your volition gives me the strength, the grace, because by myself I would not have been able to endure. And my always lovable Jesus, compassionating me, resumed his speaking. My daughter, when my divine will wants to do a complete act in the creature, and do you know what a complete act of my will means? It means complete act of God, in which is enclosed sanctity, beauty, love, power, and light as to amaze the heavens and earth. God himself must feel enraptured, but so much as to form his seat, his throne of glory, in this complete act of his that will serve him and will descend as beneficial dew for the benefit of all creatures. Therefore, in order to do this complete act, I must dispose over you a new cross, not given to anyone else, in order to mature you and make arise in you the dispositions that are needed, you in order to receive, and God in order to do this complete act of his will. Without nothingness, one cannot do anything. Therefore you, in order to receive, and we, in order to give new things, we must dispose new crosses that, united to the continuous labor of our volition, must prepare everything for an act so great. You must know that my fiat has never left you. Therefore you feel its sweet and ruling impression over every fiber, motion, and desire of your volition. Jealous of you and of its own complete act that it wanted to do, it holds and maintains its royal dominion. But do you know why? A sweet and dear secret. Listen to me. As my volition dominates your mind, your gaze, your word, so it formed your Jesus in your mind, his gaze in yours, his word in yours. As it dominated the fibers, the motion, the heart, so it formed his fibers, his motion, the heart of your Jesus in you. And as it dominated your works, steps, your whole being, so it formed his works, his steps, the whole of Jesus in you. Now, if my will would have given you the liberty of making your act, even in the most littlest and innocent things, it would not have been able to form your Jesus in you. And with the human will I am not able to, nor do I want to live. Nor would my volition have taken the commitment of forming me in the soul, if it were not sure that I would find my own will with which my humanity was animated. Its kingdom on earth will be exactly this, to form as many Jesuses for however many creatures want to live of divine will. With Jesus in souls, its kingdom will have its sumptuousness, sublimity, its magnificence of unheard of things, and it will be secure. And then, in the kingdom of my divine fiat, I will have so many living Jesuses who love me, glorify me, and give me complete glory. Therefore I so much long for this kingdom, and you long for it too, nor occupy yourself with anything else. Let me do, trust me, and I will think of everything. After this I continued to think about the divine will, and my sweet Jesus added, "My daughter, light, symbol of my divine volition, its nature is to expand as much as it can, and wherever it finds itself, it does not deny its light to anyone, whether they want it or they do not want it. At the most this happens, that one who wants it uses the light and makes use of it to also do great works. On the other hand, one who does not want it, it does not do any good, but he cannot deny that he has received the good of the light. Such is my will. More than light, it expands everywhere. It invests everything and everyone. And the sign that the soul possesses it is to feel the need, together with it, of giving herself to everyone, to do good to everyone, to run with her acts to everyone. And she would want to make so many Jesuses in order to give him to each one. My will is for everyone. I am the Jesus of everyone, and therefore then am I content when the creature makes my will, my life, hers, and she wants to give me to everyone. She is my joy and my continuous feast. July 4th, 1937, Volume 34. How God wants to form so many of His divine lives in each creature. How one who lives in the divine volition acts as bearer of everyone and everything to her Creator. I felt myself all invested by the divine volition. Everything and everywhere I found it in act that it wanted to give me its life. And oh, how happy I felt in feeling its empire, that at whatever cost, with its loving stratagems, it wanted to enclose its perennial life in me. I was surprised by it, and my always lovable Jesus, visiting my poor and little soul with His usual goodness and sweetness, told me, "My blessed daughter, if you knew how I enjoy and how my love pours itself out in manifesting to you our celestial mysteries, in what state of love our supreme being, our adorable will, is found, in order to give me enjoyment, you would be attentive to let me say in what way we find ourselves in the midst of creatures, and the great good that we can do in them. Now you know it, that our immensity envelops everything. Our power and strength is so much that we carry everything and everyone in our arms as if they were a little feather. All this is natural for our being 3 times holy, so much so that if we would want to lessen ourselves, we cannot do it. Our immensity and power flow in every fiber of the heart, in all the breaths, in the rapidity of the blood that flows in the veins, in the swiftness of the thought. We are actors and spectators, and aware of everything. But this is nothing. They are nothing other than the qualities of our Supreme Being. What is more amazing is that we want to form so many of our lives in each creature. This is the operation of God, to have the virtue of being able to form as many divine lives for however many creatures have been put forth to the light of day. After all, the creature is ours, created by us. We live together. And because we love her, our love brings us with an irresistible strength and power all ours to form ourselves as life in her. And our creative art, that is not content with creating the creatures, in the ardor of its love, it wants to create ourselves in the person created. See, therefore, in what condition we find ourselves in the midst of the human family, in the act of always forming our lives in them. But our creative art remains rejected, suffocated, without being able to continue our divine creation. While we live together with them, they live at our expense. They live because they live of us, and yet we have the great sorrow of not being able to form our life in them, while this would be our highest contentment, the greatest glory that they could give us, if they give us the freedom of making ourselves the life of every creature. But do you know where we are free to form this life of ours? In the One who lives in our will. Our divine Fiat prepares the prime materials for us in order to form our life. It places in attitude its power, its sanctity, its love, and calls us into the depth of the soul. And we, finding the adaptable and workable matter, with indescribable love, form our divine life. Not only do we form it, but we raise it, and with our highest enjoyment and delight, we develop our creative art around this celestial creature. And the chain of prodigies begins, she possessing her Creator, and our will operating in her, becomes the bearer of everyone and of everything. If she thinks, she brings us the thoughts of everyone, and she acts as supplier and repairer for all the human intelligences. If she speaks, if she works, if she walks, she carries the words, the works, the steps of everyone. The creation itself makes a decorous cortege for her, and she acts as bearer of the sky, of the stars, of the sun, of the wind, of everything. She does not leave anything behind. She brings us the homage, the glory of all our created things, even the homage of the sweet song of the tiny little bird. Possessing the life of he who has created them, everything makes a crown for her. Rather, they all want to be carried by she who possesses the speaking act, so that for each one she tells the speaking story of love, for which they have been created by their Creator. In fact, one who possesses our volition acquires our jealousy of love, because we want everything for ourselves, and this with highest justice, because there is nothing that we have not given. Therefore, with justice, we want everything. So she, taken by our same folly of love, wants everything in order to give us everything. And jealous, she wants to bring us everything in order to tell us for everyone and for each created thing her little word of love. Therefore, the one who lives in our volition is never alone. First, she is with her Creator, with whom she is always in a contest of love, how they can love each other more. Then, all things being around her, she acts as bearer of everything to him whom she loves, he who, being infinite love, wants to see all things in the creature converted into love for his love. End of July 4th. Fiat.